Welcome to another Scotland Then episode. I'm your host, Dawn, and in this episode, I'll be highlighting newspaper stories taken from the Scotsman on the 12th of April and the 28th, 29th and 30th of June 1983, around the time John Kent Smith murdered a 61-year-old woman and raped her 21-year-old daughter, and of his murder trial. You can find all the sources I used by visiting scottishmurders.com/episodes/John Kent Smith. Stories in this episode include senseless murders, prisoners gone wild, and a favourite childhood pastime of mine going very awry for a 16-year-old boy. So let's head back to April and June 1983 for all this and more. You'll remember how in the previous episodes regarding John Kent Smith's criminal history, I mentioned how he had been heavily involved in the Peterhead prison riots in 1987. Well, this first article that I came across kind of made me think that it was damn lucky there weren't more riots in prisons if what was being alleged was even halfway true. At Hamilton Sheriff Court, a dramatic testimony was made by former inmate Colin Campbell, who was claiming he had created master keys that opened nearly every lock inside Dungavel Prison in Lanarkshire. But how could this have happened, you might be wondering? Well, Colin Campbell, while he was serving a 5-year sentence, alleged that he paid prison officer Robert Stow £30, and in return Robert Stow had allowed him to take plasticine impressions of the prison's master key. Colin Campbell went on to describe how he used aluminium from a shower unit, a hacksaw blade, carbon paper, and a file to craft 5 or 6 keys, 2 of which actually worked. With these keys, Colin Campbell told the court that he and other inmates allegedly raided the prison's basement store every Saturday night for tobacco, food, and toiletries. When he was asked why he hadn't used the keys to escape, he said that there was no need as he was nearing the end of his sentence. Apparently, this alleged bribe took place in a dormitory in Dungavel Prison and was witnessed by other inmates. One of them, Charles Lansdowne, corroborated parts of Colin Campbell's story, claiming he saw Campbell press the key into plasticine inside a tobacco tin. Although another inmate, Alexander McCoy, disputed Campbell's technical ability, alleging the keys were actually made by another prisoner who was skilled in explosives and locks. Colin Campbell testified that prison officer Robert Stow joked that, "You couldn't buy me." However, Colin said when he raised his bribe to £30, Robert Stow reportedly handed over the key, although it never left his belt, for him to take impressions in plasticine. Another inmate said that he smelled alcohol in Robert Stow and saw the impression being made before any money changed hands. A locksmith also told the court that aluminium keys could be made with basic tools and that even visual inspection might suffice for duplication. 39-year-old Robert Stow of Hamilton Drive in Dungavel denied all of these allegations, although he did admit to drinking before night shifts, but vehemently rejected the claims he had allowed impressions to be taken of the prison's master key. Well, that's okay then, as long as he was just drunk on duty. Who do you believe? Prison officer Robert Stow or former prisoner Colin Campbell, who, by the way, only came forward with this information when he was arrested by police for attempting to murder 7 police officers and housebreaking? Now, this piqued my interest, and I searched and searched for more about this, but I was only able to find that upon Colin Campbell being released from Dungavel Prison, after allegedly having made master keys of the prison, he took one of the master keys with him, but upon being caught for housebreaking and being charged with that and attempting to murder 7 police officers, which I could find no more information about, he told the detectives during an interview about the interaction he had allegedly had with prison officer Robert Stow regarding bribing him to get impressions of the master key, and Colin agreed to testify against Robert Stow, which in turn gave Colin immunity to any charges surrounding the master key impressions. When Colin Campbell appeared at the High Court on the attempted murder and housebreaking charges, he was cleared of the attempted murder charges, but was sentenced to 4 years for the housebreaking charge. Anyway, back to the alleged Master Key Impression trial. On the 30th of June 1983, after a 3-day trial, the jury returned a majority verdict of not proven, clearing Robert Stow of the bribery charge. Robert Stow had been suspended on full pay since August 1982. Robert Stow's advocate said afterwards that it was unclear whether Robert would return to the prison service, although Colin Campbell had also alleged that at the time of the bribe and impressions being taken, Robert Stow had mentioned that he had applied for a transfer to Peterhead Prison, and that he didn't care one way or the other if the prisoners had a master key at Dungavel Prison. I wonder if Robert Stow did return to the prison service, and if he ever did get his transfer to Peterhead Prison, which was dubbed a prison of no hope. And I wonder if he was maybe there when the riots took place 4 years later. Another article that made me think that criminals were just having the time of their lives around this time was in the Scotsman on the 29th of June, and it reported that 36-year-old housebreaker Frank Reynolds had taken the police on a conducted tour of the town and showed them where he had committed 49 other housebreaking offences after he'd been caught at one break-in. The article just made it sound like a wee holiday, like one of those sightseeing tour buses you go on when on holiday. In total, Frank Reynolds was charged with 50 counts of housebreaking, which had involved the thefts of goods amounting to around £3,346. In today's money, that would be about £11,500 or $15,000. And he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. None of the stolen goods were recovered. Something I noticed a lot more from April and June 1983 was the amount of murders that were being reported in the newspapers. But most were only being covered by very short articles, as the murderers had admitted the murders relatively quickly and no trial was required, such as this one. The murder of 57-year-old Catherine Grier at her home in Quarrywood Avenue, Ballarrock in Glasgow, between the 1st of December 1982 and the 25th of March 1983. Most of Catherine's family, including her daughter, had moved to Canada, and so when her son John came back to Glasgow to live with his mother, Catherine was delighted. However, it wasn't long before neighbours and friends of Catherine began to notice that they hadn't seen her around for a while. But when they asked her son John where she was, he repeatedly told them that she was having a holiday. It wasn't until Catherine's daughter and other relatives in Canada began to question why the regular letters they received from Catherine had stopped that her true whereabouts was discovered. Upon Catherine's daughter asking her brother John where their mother was, and him again repeatedly replying that she was on holiday, she became suspicious and contacted the local police in Glasgow to ask them to go to her mum's flat that she shared with John and check all was okay. The police did and spoke to John, who again told them that Catherine was on holiday, and so the police left. But something just didn't feel right to them, and so 2 days later they returned, this time planning to do a rigorous search of the flat. It wouldn't take a rigorous search, though, to find Catherine, as her partially decomposed body was found in a cupboard. John was arrested and charged with his mum's murder, and during being interviewed he told police, "It takes a sick mind to do what I did. I should never be allowed to walk the streets again." At the High Court in Glasgow on the 29th of June 1983, it was revealed that Catherine's face had been smashed to pieces by an electric iron, that she had 2 skull fractures and a minimum of 6 severe blows had been inflicted, and that her body had been kept in the cupboard for 4 months. It was also disclosed that 4 psychiatrists had examined John Grier, and they had all found him sane and fit to plead. 32-year-old John Grier was sentenced to life. Now, while a lot of the murders that happened back then didn't get much coverage in the newspapers because their killers admitted guilt quite quickly and were only in court for a day before being sentenced, this next case was sprawled over multiple pages and over many days, as the killer did not admit guilt. Something I really feel he should have, as I felt this was not only a senseless killing, but also a needless trial, not to mention a waste of everyone's time and money. As the old saying goes, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Here's what happened. A party in Glasgow turned deadly after a dispute over glue sniffing led to a fatal shooting. The High Court heard that 19-year-old Edward Egan and Patrick McMonagall had been out drinking with 21-year-old William Donnelly, 20-year-old James McLagan and others before they all decided to head to William Donnelly's flat for a party. On the way, Edward and Patrick sniffed glue, and during the party they both had gone outside on 2 separate occasions to sniff more glue from a chip poke. However, it was when they decided to try and sniff glue in William Donnelly's flat, which William strongly objected to, that a fight broke out, during which William Donnelly allegedly struck both William Egan and Patrick McMonagall with an axe. After both Edward and Patrick fled the flat, William Donnelly, apparently fearing retaliation from the pair, retrieved a shotgun from his loft, later saying he had been unaware it was loaded, and went to Patrick McMonagall's house nearby to frighten them. As Edward Egan and Patrick McMonagall emerged from Patrick's home, armed with a hammer and steak knife, William Donnelly claimed he pulled the shotgun from his waistband, intending to warn them. At this moment, 20-year-old James McLagan, who had left the party early and had fallen asleep at Patrick McMonagall's home and who had been blissfully unaware of the fight between the 3 men, stepped outside and allegedly tried to grab the gun. William Donnelly said that Patrick McMonagall had slashed his hand with the knife, a fact that Patrick denied, and the gun discharged, fatally wounding James McLagan in the neck and head. William Donnelly initially ran from the scene, dropping the shotgun in a nearby garden, but he later surrendered to the police. William Donnelly lodged a special defence of self-defence and denied shooting and murdering James McLagan and of assaulting Edward Egan and Patrick McMonagall with an axe. And you'll never guess who William Donnelly's solicitor was. It was Mr. Joseph Beltrami, who we last heard about in our episode released on the 7th of September 2021, one of the first ever episodes that I covered with my sister Cole, and it was about James Griffith's shooting spree in Glasgow in 1969, and how James and Patrick Meehan were wrongly suspected of having brutally murdered Rachel Ross, with Patrick Meehan being found guilty of her murder, until his conviction was quashed many years later, with Joseph Beltrami playing a very large part in just how long Patrick Meehan wrongly stayed in prison. Anyway, the jury ultimately accepted that the shooting was not a premeditated murder, but a reckless act during a volatile confrontation, and 21-year-old William Donnelly was jailed for 4 years after being found guilty of the culpable homicide of 20-year-old James McLagan. William Donnelly was also acquitted of assaulting 19-year-old Edward Egan and Patrick McMonagall with an axe. It's really sad that someone not involved in the fight at all was killed. No one should have been killed that night. Okay, so nowadays we're used to seeing fly-on-the-wall documentaries that follow police, ambulance staff, hospital A&E departments, etc. around. But back in 1983, there had only been previous exposés on corrupt police and stressed-out school teachers. And so, in a bold move by the BBC, Edinburgh University was to become the latest subject of a 6-part documentary series that was titled Campus, and was shown on BBC One on Thursdays at 10:15 p.m. It offered viewers a behind-the-scenes look at academic life during the institution's 400th anniversary, with the series applying the same observational lens to university staff, students and ceremonies. The programme aimed to portray the university as a sprawling institution with a 65 million annual budget, 10,000 students, 1,500 academic staff, 4,000 non-academic staff, 7 faculties and 150 departments. Rather than focusing on lectures or research though, the series spotlighted the arrival of a new student, a medical student, the student union president, a professor, the principal and a graduate, capturing moments of beer drinking, protests and ceremonial pomp. This series coincided with a tense period for the university, which was marked by budget cuts and looming disputes over staff redundancies. Dr. John Burnett, principal of Edinburgh University, appeared frequently in the series, including in scenes from the university's secret court meetings, and he described the documentary as honest in what it was trying to represent, adding that the university's reputation would depend on how the public interpreted these portrayals. So, were you at Edinburgh University when this was filmed, or do you remember hearing about it or watching this series? And if so, what were your thoughts on how Edinburgh University was portrayed in this series? And finally, I don't know about you, but when I was young, we used to love making tree swings with rope, and it didn't matter how high up in the tree the swing was or how far from the ground you were, the higher the better. It made it more exciting. However, this next story might have taken that to the extreme, when 16-year-old Graham Stewart of Alexandria in Dumbartonshire was at Ballochcastle Country Park one night and decided to go on a rope swing that I assume, but I could be wrong, had been professionally placed for the brave few to try it, as this particular rope swing was over 150-foot deep gully. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? Graham positioned himself on the rope swing and prepared to swing, but that didn't happen. Instead, he fell the 150 feet into the gully below. Now, this was a tiny article, a few lines, and all it said was that Graham Stewart had a series of head and leg injuries, but he was stable and amazingly alive. That was unbelievable. So, have you survived any shocking accidents like that? Care to share? And that brings us to the end of another Scotland Then episode. I hope you found it interesting, and I'd love to hear from you if you had been at Edinburgh University at the time the BBC filmed their docu-series, or if you too have survived a shocking accident. Just an aside, I can't tell you how disappointed I was that no one, not one person, took me up on my word challenge in the last Scotland Then episode. So disappointed. Next week, I'm hoping to bring you another Scottish Murders episode about two murders by the same man in 1984 and 1985. As always, we really do appreciate you for listening and for your continued support. So until next time, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.